Hello, everyone. We are going online now to YouTube. Hello, my name is Anastasia Martinenko. I'm from Ukraine, from Zero Waste Alliance Ukraine, and from NGO OZERO. And today our talk will be about waste incineration in Ukrainian realities. It's a difficult topic, so we decided to call an expert who is Janek Bach from Zero Waste Europe. Hello, Janek.
Good afternoon from Brussels. Good to be here.
So the topic is complicated, as I said already, because it's complicated from different sides. Decision makers are trying to take the right decision when choosing the right technology for waste management in the country, including Ukraine. And people who want to reduce their personal impact, they want to find the right technology, whether to send it to landfill or to send it to incineration plant. And I would say that in Ukraine, we are rather lucky in this question because we don't have many incineration plants yet, but still we have some. And different technologies of incineration are being promoted widely, and we see it a lot in society. So this is why it's very useful for us, for everyone who will listen to us today, to have the view of the expert from the European Union, because we take examples from the European Union and we're saying it's working there. Why shouldn't we make it here? Yeah. So I'm gonna share my screen to shortly show what is our plan today. Can you see my screen right now, Janet?
No, I can't see. I cannot see anything here.
Oh, sorry. Just a second. I will try again.
Oh,
yeah.
Now it's coming. Yes.
Good. So today we have such a plan. We will shortly, we have described the situation in Ukraine. We will talk about it more, but actually it implies to many other countries, not only post-Soviet countries, but to many developing countries as well. And then we will have some questions and we will talk, well, you will explain and I will ask questions during our talk. So let's start with the first one. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and let you share your screen. So can you please tell us, Janek, what are the main technologies of incineration that exist right now in the world and widely are used in the European Union as well?
Yeah, just a second. I'm gonna also share my screen. Okay. Can you just,
yeah, I see.
Okay, excellent. So maybe first of all, if I may, the topic indeed is very controversial, I would say, and it's also discussed a lot here in Brussels and in Europe. And as you said, Anastasia, sometimes incineration is promoted, as a particularly European incinerators are promoted as safe and as a good practice in other countries. So, but first of all, yeah, let's maybe go into and see what is incineration. As you can see, there are a range of technologies when we talk about waste incineration. So the most typical name, what we hear most is incineration, and there are hundreds of plants at the moment in Europe, and I think around the globe about 1,600. So it's quite a many of them. And these are this is the most common technology, and what they do is that they simply kind of take your bag, they shred it, and then they burn it directly. Apart from that, we also have pyrolysis and gasification. These are a bit similar technologies. Basically, they do the same thing. The difference is the air. That's the presence of air and the pressure in the combustion chamber. So pyrolysis, what it does is that it turns waste into oily substance, then which is normally burnt afterwards immediately. And gasification is basically with a little bit of air and with a high pressure, it turns the waste into gas, which is called as a syngas. The last two technologies, pyrolysis and gasification, have not been very successful. There have been a lot of publications, particularly on gasification, why it's not working. They are both very delicate technologies in terms of what they can accept as a feedstock. So it seems like they need quite a relatively sorted waste streams in order to work. And yeah, so but basically, let's not confuse. They are kind of all about. It's all about thermal treatment, meaning burning of waste. And when we burn waste, we basically turn them into. We use the resources and we turn them into ash and residues. Hopefully, that's clear as a basic in terms of what are the technologies.
Yeah, it's quite clear now. I want to say that in Ukraine, we have all these systems present. And in the capital, in Kiev, we have a waste incineration plant that deals with 25% of the waste of the capital.
Yeah.
And it's quite an old plant with not all the proper filters. And one of the most popular systems now that is being actively popularized is the gasification. This is where people can send their own waste, even by post office, through some NGOs, and pay for the gasification because they just want to do better. They think that it's better to send it whether to the gasification than to the landfill. But we will talk about it a bit later. And can you please tell us if the safe incineration exists? Because this is the question that we receive very often, like yes. It's safer, yeah.
Yes, indeed. As I said, particularly European incinerators, because of allegedly very high standards, are often given as example to rest of the countries in the world as being safe. And so we've been looking quite a lot about the safety issue and also some other issues. Overall, I would just like to say that waste incineration has three kinds of impacts. So the first is related to the air emissions, so it's health and safety. Then it also impacts circular economy in a way that it undermines activities that help us to move towards a more circular economy, and it also impacts climate. Let me maybe just look, since you asked particularly about the health issues, let's look at some of what we know about the safety of incinerators. So the first thing, when it comes to waste incineration, and particularly knowing about the emissions, then we only currently conduct short-term measurements of emissions, meaning that we only measure emissions during about 0.1% of the operation time or the production time, as they like to call it. So it's a very insignificant timing in terms of when you think of that waste incinerators, they have to work normally 365 days a year, so it's only 12 hours, and when we started to look into what happens to emissions during the longer period, then we started to find big differences. Another thing I just wanted to mention quickly is that also the emissions are only measured when so-called stable combustion conditions. So we don't measure when, for example, the plant is starting up or starting down. And we also only do measurements during the pre-announced visits. So it kind of allows you to prepare sometimes for these visits. So as I said, when we started to look at what happens in terms of long-term, we did a case study together with toxicologists in the Netherlands, and related to the latest plant in the Netherlands, and started to measure for 20,000 hours. And so if just to think of like the difference between 12 hours or 20,000, obviously you actually see the huge difference. So it covers a significant amount of time of the operations. And you can see here, the first line, the red line is the measurements during the required short-term measurements. And you see that here it complies with the emission thresholds. But when you start looking at up and what emerged as information during the long-term measurements, we found that there are actually significant moments where the plant was exceeding the required thresholds significantly. And these are normally moments where plants were starting up or closing down, where they had some technical issues, and they are not something that happens just once or twice. In fact, this particular plant, which is situated in Harlingen, had 38 moments since 2015. So it's really significant, and it's also significant because during these moments when the plants are starting up or closing down, they often emit about 40% to up to 200% of the emissions allowed during the year. So it's really significant. Apart from that, I think one of the issues that we have with the waste incineration plants is that the data is not available, and what is available often covers, as I said, those so-called normal operating situations. And so we've been also looking into other ways of finding out about the impact of waste incineration, and one of the things that NGOs have been starting to do is biomonitoring. So biomonitoring means that you look at the environment next to the waste incineration plants, so surrounding normally 2 kilometers of surrounding area, and you measure the contaminants in the soil, in the feed, and the milk and eggs, and so, for example, again, toxicologists, but many other NGOs, they have been finding significant concentrations of dioxins and furans, in particular in the eggs of backyard chickens in the surrounding of the waste incineration plants. Why chicken eggs? Because chickens, particularly backyard chickens, they are allowed to free range, so that they can move around the outside. So they are not, it's opposite to the industrial chickens who are stayed inside. So they go outside, they feed outside, and whatever is out there in terms of toxins, they will also eat it. And that's why the chicken eggs are actually very good, biomarkers for those emissions. So yeah, maybe also there was another study actually published quite recently, just about a month or 2 months ago, on the impacts of waste incinerators in children, and the study found significant concentrations of heavy metals in the toenails of children, and this is quite worrying because heavy metals, as you know, they can impact our health, particularly children who are growing. So they are studies that indicate that heavy metals can, for example, alter your growth and development, your obesity, your cognitive and respiratory disorders, and including cancer. So this study was actually, it was very recent, and it's quite worrying because when you look at the toenails, so it's it shows that it's these contaminants have been arriving to or have been sedimenting in children's over the longer period. So it's a very good sign of how the impact of waste incinerators. So maybe just to mention also, because when we talk about waste incinerators, we talk about as an alternative sort of to landfilling and what happens to and the fact that waste incineration burns the waste and significantly reduces the amount of waste, but how we should also know that it's actually up to 30%, depending on what is being burned, stays as ash and residues, and often these are very toxic. And there are also some regulations which allow the use of those toxic wastes including in agricultural settings. So I wanted to highlight a study made by IPEN on toxic gas and how it has poisoned the food chain. It also links to the transboundary shipments, so because it's allowed to ship those toxic residues to other countries, where sometimes they have been using it inappropriately and results in kind of contamination of the food chain. So yeah, maybe these are just a few things. I think there are maybe the important parts of the impacts. There are also, of course, other impacts of waste incineration. Happy to explain more if you have questions.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, actually, we have received some questions concerning the safeness. And also one question was, what is better to do with the ash if it's created already? Or what do they asked, what do civilized countries do with the incinerator ash? But also I want to ask one question. Very often when we discuss waste incineration, we get the questions like, but there are filters and they protect, or the smoke is white, so it's safe. What can you say about it?
So as I said, it seems often okay when you look at the kind of short term, but there is increasing amount of biomonitoring studies that there's actually really a lot of them. And interesting, for example, some of them, they link the toxins in the environment to the food that we grow. So there are some NGOs already disencouraging eating, for example, chicken eggs from the surroundings of incinerators. So I think the biomonitoring studies is a good source of information and a good way of warning that we have many loopholes in the current regulation. So another issue that came up, for example, when we were looking at incinerators, there's a lot of emissions are actually calculated, meaning that we're not measuring them directly. We were looking again an incinerator in the Netherlands, and we found that, for example, the temperatures that are required for burning waste, which is normally 850 as a minimum for 2 seconds, these were calculated, meaning that they were not the real temperatures, and there was a significant fluctuations in terms of the temperatures. This means that waste is not burned properly, and will very likely result in toxic emissions. So one of the things that we should be mostly worried about is the dioxins, and these happen in when you are burning, for example, waste, and particularly plastics. So you really want to, if you want to burn it properly, it has to have a high temperature, and even then it's not ensured that you get rid of all of them. So there are, I would say, NGO community is quite concerned. There's a lot of NGOs working on, particularly focusing on the toxicity issue, and they see waste incineration and the residues of waste incineration as a big source of so-called POPs, persistent organic pollutants, such as dioxins and furans. So it's very concerning. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And also then the next question will be if you know, this beautiful waste incinerator in Vienna in Austria, or the one in Copenhagen where they can even ski. We have we have in our social networks, sometimes people share this news as something good happening, but indeed they are not safe, are they? And if they are not, why do they exist?
That's a good question. Yeah. Maybe let's see if I can show you some slides here. So I think apart from so there is a tendency in general to invest into the kind of air pollution capture systems. So that's one of the reasons why waste incinerators currently are very expensive. They are the most expensive way of treating waste. So just to give you an example, for example, waste incineration per ton of waste that you burn, you pay around 1,000 euro. And it's also the capital costs of building. It's also about 1,000 euro per ton of waste that you want to burn. So if you build a facility of to treat 100,000 tons, it costs around 100 million or more. So the Copenhagen plant, for example, they have invested a lot into air pollution systems, and they cost around 500 million. So it's an insane amount of money. I'm sure you can do much more things with that money. So an important thing, so they have been trying to minimize the emissions of the pollutants, but we don't have yet data to know if they have been actually able to manage it. One of the things that I would like to highlight in this particular context is the CO2 emissions from the plant. So when you burn waste, actually, it's one of the most carbon intensive ways of producing energy. And I just wanted to highlight the study by Waste to Energy by UNEP. And they found out that actually, if you consider the emissions of waste incineration, it's about 250-600 grams per kilos per ton of waste incinerated, which is actually comparable with coal combustion. And if you take into considerations also of biogenic emissions, you get around 1,100 kilos of CO2 per ton of waste, which makes it actually higher in CO2 emissions than burning fossil fuels. So, and you know, we live in a climate emergency, and we really don't want to promote something which is not low carbon, and waste burning is definitely not one of those things. Another thing which I wanted to mention, for example, for particularly these regions, the European Commission recently, the expert group who was working on so-called sustainable finance, they decided to exclude waste incineration from the list of activities which are considered sustainable and could contribute to the climate change mitigation. And the reason for the exclusion was because the experts who were working on that group found that waste incineration is significantly harms the circular economy, the transition towards circular economy. And the plant, for example, in Copenhagen is particularly problematic because they have built it too large. It has too much capacity, meaning that it will undermine any kind of separate collection. And they already have to start importing waste from other countries, which clearly is not a good business, I would say. Why would you import waste from other countries to your own country and burn it in a way which is extremely carbon intensive? So it really doesn't make sense. I also wanted to kind of like, since you mentioned the Vienna and Copenhagen, you can see that what is happening recently, because waste incinerators, they are not very popular. There's a lot of social movement against it, environmental movement. And so what we see now is that they install, in order to kind of to win the people's support, they have started to build those really fancy incinerators. So you can see on the right, on the left, on the right side, at the bottom, we'll see the Vienna incinerator, which is extremely beautiful, well decorated. And then on the left side, we see the Copenhagen, which even has a ski slope on it, so people can go and enjoy skiing. And I think these are examples of greenwashing in order to win the support of people. It's nothing to do with that these plants are more safe than other plants in Europe, not necessarily. So the future will show us how safe they really are. As I said, one of the main issues we have is actually having the real data in terms of emissions. It would be very interesting to conduct some biomonitoring or long-term measurements of emissions. In any case, waste incineration for me, and I think for many of us, doesn't really make sense in the 21st century. It's too expensive, really. It's more than double of the price of other alternatives. They are bad for climate. And why would we invest so much money into something which soon has to be phased out if you want to be compliant with the Paris targets, for example? I don't know if I answered. I said a lot of things, so.
No, it's good. You answered. You did. Also, I'm thinking about that on our experience. Also, as you said, incineration, it harms circular economy, and it inspires more consuming.
Yes.
But, yeah, because people, when we ask them, did your consuming habits have they changed after you started to send your waste to incineration? And they said yes, because you kind of feel that you can buy more anyway. It can be incinerated, like it disappears into nothing, but indeed
yes,
it doesn't, as you said. Yeah.
And I would say, if I may, this is exactly what happens, is that we often don't see what happens to the waste that we generate at homes or businesses. It seems to disappear either in landfills or in incinerators, and it doesn't. And sometimes there is no incentive for us to do something about it. Not only for us, but I mean also for the companies to redesign products that end up in being burned. So yes, incineration seemingly reduces the amount of waste, but what it does, you still have to landfill the residues, and a lot of it is actually turned into air pollution. So and that's something that we really want to avoid. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Also, I want to add that all the links that are written down there on the slides, we will share with everyone all the links. You will see them in the chat at the YouTube channel of Zero Waste Europe organization, and we will also send all the links in the event, the Facebook event, so that you can read more about all these cases. So can you please tell a bit more about the cases that are less intensive for the circular economy, that are better? What should we do if not incinerate? Let's keep it simple.
Yeah. So there are alternatives, and we're actually working, and we're going to publish something next week, so-called material recovery and biological treatment. We have been already talking about it for the last 10 years, I think. So now we are publishing a report explaining what it is and why it's an alternative to waste incineration. So material recovery and biological treatments, they are actually so-called upgraded MBT plants. Maybe you know that we have incinerators, and then we also have mechanical biological treatment plants. The difference with MBT is that they normally, what they do is that they take your waste and they intensify, they turn it into basically a fuel, which is called RDF, which then can be burned or landfilled. So it's almost the same as incineration. It's just a step before, and it's, so we see that this is also not working. So what we need to do is to invest in some technologies that allow to recover more materials from residual waste, and then stabilize the organic part which is still in there. Because what we really want to do with our residual waste, which still happens, that we want to cover, first of all, more materials, and we think that MRPT plants, they could be recovering at least 25% more. It really depends on the national context or the local context. And secondly, we want to minimize the negative impact on landfilling, meaning that we want to make sure that the organic part is stabilized, that it doesn't leak into air and contaminate, I mean, not air, water, and contaminate our water systems. And it also shouldn't, yeah, as I said, leak into air as a methane. So it really needs to be stabilized, so it doesn't produce any methane. And finally, the MRPT plants are also good in terms of that they keep the waste management systems flexible. What does it mean? It means that, you know, we talked before that incinerators, what they do is that they lock the waste management into burning because they are expensive. You need to pay back the loans. So you need to bring weekly or yearly certain amount of tonnages. And if you don't do that, then the plant makes a loss. And then who pays for that? Well, everybody has to pay for that then. So in order to keep the system more flexible, MRPT allows you to adapt to the local context in terms of you can choose what kind of technologies you want to invest to recover, for example, more paper or more plastics, to focus on maybe more organics. So, and they are less than half of the price of the waste incineration. So it's a really good alternative in terms of to waste incineration. So, and it doesn't have any impact on negative impact on climate, because, as I said, it stabilizes the organic. So in fact, you can even capture the biogas if you want to, also to produce renewable energy. So I can just maybe.
Yeah. Oh, can we call this MRBT?
It has
yeah.
three
Can
parts.
we call it a transitional option, or is it like a good option to start and do?
No, you're right. You're right. MRPT plants, they don't substitute zero waste systems, which means that you need to have a separate collection of all the recyclable waste streams. So if you don't have a place separate collection, then you shouldn't start with MRPT. MRPT is really for as a kind of like a transitionary strategy for dealing with the residual waste, in order to avoid the negative impacts and in order to keep the flexibility in the system. You really should focus on the upstream, meaning that you separately collecting different waste. You know, we in the EU now we are already separately collecting paper, plastics, metals, and now also the bio-waste separate collection will become a mandatory, which is a very important thing, and also we'll start collecting separately textiles, even waste oils. So this is the strategy you need to follow, and only then you, in order to deal with the residuals, you should consider MRPT it should never be the first option.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to say a bit more about how it works?
Yeah. So as I said, this is the scheme of an MRPT plant. So you take the residual waste and then you send it for mechanical processing. So you do the sorting and separating, and you particularly want to separate dry materials from organics because organic is this kind of sticky stuff that sticks to other materials, and then you cannot recycle them. It's more because they are kind of contaminated, the materials. For example, particularly in a paper, if you put apple and paper together, it gets contaminated and you cannot anymore recycle it. Yeah, that's an example. And then the second section would be the mechanical sorting section. This is particularly for the coarse materials, dry materials that are separated from the organics. And the final would be the biological treatment section, where you want to stabilize the organics. So basically, it's a very similar process to composting. So you can link it also to anaerobic digestion in order to capture the energy from that, and then you would have the refining, of course, of the coarse materials. So so what is interesting about MRPT is that you can really adopt the technology according to your needs. And when you study what is in the residual waste, for example, if you see that there is still significant amounts of paper or organics in there, that it also informs you in terms of what you need to do upstream, sort of like what you need to do before. You need to do something more about separating organics, because what happens in there, it's already kind of sometimes too late. You still want to recover materials, but you want to avoid it. So it's a kind of works hand in hand with kind of like more progressive waste management systems.
Thank you, Yannick. Also, we receive many questions right now on the YouTube, and we see them. And after we finish with the presentation and with the questions, we will try to answer your questions as well, so you can continue writing them.
Okay.
Yeah, and can you please tell us about the option that would be not so pricey, because it's hard to find a cost in Ukraine for any technology, but at the same time, the best option? I'm sure you know the one.
You mean, yeah, so as I said, so the MRPT plants, they would, so landfilling is the cheapest option, but I mean, we also don't want to landfill things. So MRPT plant would be, to have those technologies in place, would cost something around maybe 300-400 euros per ton of waste. So it's significantly cheaper in terms of waste incineration. So yeah, in terms of, so do you want like specific technologies that are needed for No,
I meant the zero waste programs and maybe some examples.
Okay, sorry, yeah, I misunderstood.
Sorry.
So yes, so we, we have a lot of best practices. We work with around 400 cities at the moment in Europe, and you can check out the website where there's so we organize trainings and things, and as a part of that, we also collect best practices. I just want to mention 3 of them because there are so many of them. I thought maybe picking some of those in Central and Eastern Europe would kind of resonate more with Ukraine because they are not so far from you. So maybe just to mention, well, I actually started with Spain, but just wanted to mention because it's very, very exciting. So one of the big issues is the separate collection of organics, as I said. And this is really key because, as I said, organic waste is still about half of the waste that ends up in the residual waste. So you really want to separate it because If not, it mixes up with other materials that cannot be then recovered anymore. So there is a case in Pontevedra where they started doing the bio-waste collection, and this was a very interesting project because they, in a very short time, they managed to mobilize a lot of different municipalities to be part of. Just in 3 years, they managed to collect already 2,000 tons of bio-waste, were locally even composted. And they managed also to mobilize 2/3 of the provinces and municipalities in the area. And it's a good example maybe to follow also in Ukraine, to start from particularly from bio-waste separate collection together with some key waste streams of like paper, plastics, and metals, and then move on to collecting, for example, maybe textiles and some other stuff. So another one interesting, this is very interesting story from Romania. And why? Just because they started to have a separate collection, and they had 1% recycling, and just in 3 months they managed to change it to 40% waste recycling in the area. So it's sometimes it's you really need to have willingness to put in place and raise awareness of talk to people, and people easily follow up because they can see the benefits of this. In this case, they put in place door-to-door collection, separate collection of 5 waste streams, including bio-waste. And yeah, just in a few months later, they were moved from 1% to 40%. So it's truly amazing. And sometimes you know, we think that it's so complicated, the recycling, and I don't know what's the exact figure at the moment in Ukraine, but you know, if you can 3 months change, then and it's what is interesting is all these methods, they are extremely cheap. They are so much cheaper than landfilling or burning. So you really want to capture those recyclables and sell it or turn it into a compost that can be used in an agriculture, for example, in the agriculture, or for growing plants and so on.
Yannick, may I ask, how big are these cities, Salatea and Pontevedra? How big are they? How many inhabitants?
So so these they are not particularly big. In this, I just chose these ones from because I thought they will resonate a little more because they are not far from Ukraine. But we have some big cases also from, for example, in Italy, in Milan, and some other cases where you have hundreds of thousands. These ones are just a few thousands. So yeah, so it's but it doesn't mean that you cannot do it in the larger cities. So I just wanted to mention quickly another case study, which is the Ljubljana. It's the capital city of Slovenia. It's a slightly bigger city. It's still not considered, it's not the same as Barcelona or even Copenhagen, but still it's a capital city, quite a lot of people living there, and they are now recycling about 60% of waste, and it's all because of the door-to-door collection. So the door-to-door collection is really key for any waste management. They also they changed the way they were collecting waste. So, for example, encouraging to produce less residual waste by collecting more often recyclables. We see that, for example, here in Brussels, because I think it's a mistake sometimes. You see that residual waste is collected twice a week, while recyclables are only, collected once a week. So maybe it's not a good thing to have something to change here also. Yeah, so just there are, I would maybe recommend if people are more interested on other cases, there are really a lot of them available on our website. I just go back here, you can see it here, zerowastecities.eu. As I said, we organize regular webinars on zero waste cities, workshops, even study tools. So if you're interested in visiting some of those best practices, you can register and come and visit, for example, cases in Ljubljana or in Italy that I mentioned, or even, yeah, it depends. So normally we organize about 2 in a year. We also organize conferences, so just keep eye open on what's happening.
Thanks a lot, Yannick. Also, I really love the website, Zero Waste Cities. It's so many cases there, and it's very useful. I mean, you can find the case that applies to your particular city. And this is where I want to ask a short question. What would you recommend to start? I mean, I understand that it should go in line, but is it easier to imply this kind of changes with waste management on the city level or on the government level? I understand that it should be done both, but still.
Yeah, well, I think city level is always because waste happens at the local level. I mean, you know, the waste management is happening in a municipal level. So whenever it becomes more kind of more cities together at the government level, you can give indications, but then actual work always happens at the local level. So you need to have the local government support and the citizen support for it. So it's always easier to start with at the local level, and it's a really good way of also to mobilize the community in terms of seeing what happens actually to the waste. It kind of brings people together. It gives them pride even. So yeah, I would say you can give indications like the government can decide to sort of like, okay, we need to move towards recycling, which it needs to do because we need to move towards more circular economy. We cannot continue our wasteful ways of living. But then the actual plans and the implementation happens at the local level. So you also need to work with the cities and the citizens.
Yeah, so basically, if you're a citizen, and basically you are, all of us are, then, and you want to do some changes, so demand it from your local politics. By the way, we have elections very soon in Ukraine, and this is one of the things that can be demanded.
Exactly. Yes, you should.
Also, I want to ask, because it's so much in time right now, concerning the situation with COVID-19. We have a situation right now in Kyiv, for example, where the municipality is collecting used masks and gloves, single-use ones, and sending them to incineration. How do you think, and how much do you know about this? What should be better done? Because there is waste which is hazardous waste, and there is waste which is just single-use gloves, masks, and this type of waste. What should be done with this?
So yes. So first of all, we see a lot that waste incineration is promoted during COVID as a way to deal with this waste, and we strongly disagree with it. And I wanted to just show you that, for example, WHO, so for Health Organization and UNEP, have actually recommended other ways to treat this waste. So they recommend actually to disinfect the waste instead of burning, and this comes particularly from the fact that burning of waste produces toxins, which then has another negative impact on you. So what we recommend, I would actually like to refer to the healthcare specialist. In this case, Healthcare Without Harm. They have produced a very nice kind of guide what should happen to particular healthcare waste, because I think this is the one which most people have concern about in terms of, you know, that the fact that it can be infectious, and so what we are recommending is to use steaming, kind of microwave systems, which are kind of steam-based, which allow to kill the bacteria, the virus, very quickly. Because I think there are a lot of misunderstandings about COVID. One of the things is that sometimes they say that you need to have a very high temperature, or you will survive for weeks on the materials, and that's not the case. It's actually it's a virus which doesn't like really water, particularly when it's a warm water. So boiled water would already kill it. You definitely don't need to have a waste incineration. So for example, the World Health Organization, they say that to use this kind of autoclaving, where you put it in a bunker, which then has a water vapor and a higher temperature, and it just neutralizes the virus. And it's also a good way of because what it does is it's only eliminates the virus, but and then afterwards, if you wanted to, you could still use the materials and recycle them. For example, in healthcare, there's a lot of very good, high quality materials that could be reused. So there's no really reason for stopping the segregation and just burn them. And when it comes to the municipal waste, even less so. For example, European Commission did a guide on saying that we should just continue. They kind of recommended to continue the business as usual in terms of separate collection and recycling, and only take adjustments if it's needed, for example, because of the shortage of staff, which is the main reason why in some places they have stopped separately collecting wastes. But in these cases, you should not burn them. You should maybe store them and then recycle them after. So yeah, I don't know if I was able to reply to your question.
Oh, you did. Thank you. And the main question would be, it's almost 1 hour that we're speaking. The time goes so fast. Yeah. The main question, many people ask this question exactly, but we left it to the end because first we need to understand everything, the technologies, and then the result. So what is more safe, taking into account Ukrainian realities? Is it landfilling? Because we don't have sanitized landfilling, and our landfills, they burn sometimes as well. Mm-hmm. Or is it incineration?
Yes. Well, I mean, I would say actually it's not neither landfilling nor incineration, because for example, yesterday I was talking about the situation in Russia where you're recycling just about 8% or something like that. So in these cases, you really need to focus on putting in place separate collection and recycling before anything else. Even banning, for example, single-use items. And only then you should start considering what to do with it. And I think in this context where you have nothing, incineration is really a bad choice. So you would, it's much cheaper to invest in improving some landfilling, then invest huge amounts of money and then lock yourself into burning of waste. But as I said, as a first step, really, you need to have a separate collection. And then what is as a residual, then, as I said, we recommend the MRPT as an alternative, because once MRPT has treated the waste, there is so much less waste left over, and it's stable, meaning that you can landfill it safely. It doesn't produce any leachages. So that would be the kind of answer, because as I said, it's very wrong to start thinking about waste incineration in a context where very little waste is separated. It just means that you're basically burning everything, all the recyclables, all the materials that you could reuse, they just get lost. It's not good for environment. It's not good for health. It's not good for the climate.
Thank you. And if not only decision makers are listening right now, and they are, but also people who just send their own waste because they want to reduce their impact and they want to do something for better, they send their own waste to incinerators. So what can you tell to them?
Yes, so I would really like to warn them about the impacts of waste incineration. You know, we have been covering local groups who kind of oppose waste incineration in many parts of Europe. Particularly, I would like to maybe in this case highlight a group of women in Italy, so-called Mares Against Incineration. So these Mares, they came together because they were very concerned about the impacts of waste incineration. They have been reading about it. And as I said, you know, you don't want your children to be contaminated and find heavy metals in your nail toes, or even the food you eat to find dioxins in there. I would not really recommend in supporting waste incineration. It's extremely costly. It does not help to solve the waste issue. It has a lot of impacts. So I think I would really call people to support more zero waste solutions. So ask the region or the government to do something about the waste and start doing more separate collection. Ask for your shopkeepers if they can provide things without packaging. That's a good start. Instead of throwing your packaging into waste incineration, maybe start from there. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions you want to cover with your presentation?
Well, I mean, maybe if I could quickly just to say that, so in Europe, as we hear, it's always brought as a good example. And in fact, from 2017, the European Commission has been increasingly proposing to phase out any financial support for waste incineration. So in order to not promote this technology, in order to avoid the lock-in and the climate impact and so on. So it's not correct to say that you know, this is technology that we like in Europe. No, that's not correct. I think we really we are now struggling, and we want to phase out from waste incineration. We want to move into a more circular economy, and I think that has to be the message to spread. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we do. As I said already, we do look at the technologies of the European Union and other world as something that we should replicate. But I think that we should take not only the best experience, but also the worst experience, and not make the same mistakes that have been made already. And I hope that our government will take this into decision. We will try our best, and there are many activists who do as well. And it's important that people also understand and support the right practices and spread the information as well. Thanks a lot for your presentation. Do we have time for any questions?
Yes, I would be happy to to spend a couple of more minutes to if you have some urgent questions. Yes.
Okay.
Also afterwards.
There are many questions, and there are many on the YouTube page. I'm sure that we cannot reply all of them because there are many, but if we don't, then we will make we will collect the questions and we will reply to them maybe a week later. Just we will make a post, and then you can read the answer to the question that you have asked already. So one of the questions was, what is done with the toxic ash after the incineration? And also we had somewhere similar question here. Yeah, ash is perceived as a good fertilizer. This is why Ukrainians burn organic matter. What can you say about it?
Yes, so the burning of it, it's not a good thing to do with organic waste, because what you really want to do is you want to recover the material, meaning that you want to reuse it to go on the soils, to keep the nutrients in there. So the burning is an absolute no for organics. And it's separate collection of bio waste and organics is also as a first step for better waste management. So definitely no, it shouldn't be burning waste, bio waste. And in terms of the as you said, the residues from waste incineration, then yes, we have seen that some countries have been trying to reuse or recycle the bottom ash and even the fly ash, which is extremely toxic because it captures all the heavy metals and other contaminants in the elements in the system, and they've been trying to kind of reuse and exploit in order to to reduce even more the amount of waste that is left over. But unfortunately, what we have seen is that there's a lot of problems with that. In fact, Netherlands is one of those countries that really tried to promote it. They even call it a Dutch Green Deal. And recently, last year, actually, two ministries produced reports about all the problems that it causes. Apart from the fact that it's toxic and the elements, they don't stay in for example, when it's used in a concrete or it's often used in a public works, for example, for the road works, it leaks out. It doesn't stay in there often, and so they produced these reports which they showed all the problems, including corruption. So it's probably the best way if you have incineration is simply to landfill it in a safe way. You should not start using it particularly avoid using any kind of agricultural setting because it will poison our food. You should also not use it, for example, in Netherlands, in some other countries, they have been using it to use the water dams. And there are examples where the materials have been leaking out from there, particularly dioxins, which is the worst kind of toxins that we want to escape. So yeah, I don't think I would not encourage to use them in any kind of way out of landfills. So
thank you. And then the next question would be, which materials or what type of waste is better to incinerate than to landfill in Ukrainian realities? For example, medical, hazardous textiles, or maybe materials that are like not single materials, but mixed materials.
Yeah, composite. I mean, as I said, I don't think there is any material that you should be burning. So, because for example, when you talk about plastics, you really don't want to burn plastic. Plastics is full of all kinds of elements in there that when they mix together with a high heat, it will produce new elements which are even more toxic. So it's not a solution for that. So you should really kind of see if you produce this kind of composite materials, if you can actually avoid producing them in the first place. And at the moment, the best option is to safely landfill them. That's also not a long-term option, but at the moment. And when it comes to other materials like paper, why should you burn paper? Also not really. Bio-waste, which is the largest part, you definitely don't want to burn it because it really makes sense. Also in terms of the energy you cover from burning organics is about 10, 15 times you get more energy out of it if you use it, for example, in anaerobic digestion plants. So it's not really efficient way of recovering energy from organic sire. So yeah, I would not, I mean, I'm not a big fan of waste incineration. So why would you burn? But because what it does, it takes the kind of rather neutral elements like waste that you have at home, and when you put it all together, it turns them into a toxic material. So you have like, when you look at your waste bag at home, none of these things, they're gonna jump into your face. But when you put it in a bunker and you turn it into then you mix toxic plastic with some other materials, and so you start generating other toxic compounds that you cannot deal anymore. Meaning you need to have invest in millions of euros to capture them. So it really doesn't make sense.
Thank you. I think the last phrase that you said, it's crucial. Yeah, it's simple if you think about it, but then, I mean, people just sometimes they want to make a better decision, but they don't know, and this is where we need to help them to understand what is better. And here then the next question will be, what is better to do with the garden waste if there is a lot and composting may take a few years, and also if the trees are sick? Can we burn them, incinerate? Burn in open burning, I mean, you don't send them to the incinerator.
Well, I mean, I would not recommend to send them to municipal or industrial waste incinerators. You have other biomass plants for that if you needed to, but in general, I think it's what you would really like to have. I mean, I'm not talking about trees, because trees goes beyond municipal waste. So it's the whole different topic. There are reasons why we don't want to burn trees. Also for biodiversity reasons, but for the garden waste, actually mixing it with, I think in Denmark they have some good examples, but they must also have them in other places where you actually mix them with other organic waste or manure, and you can actually use them for biogas, and I think that would be a good alternative. You should, I would not recommend to burn them, because again, the main thing is that you lose the material. So once you burn it, you can't use it for anything. So you lose the materials that you can apply otherwise on the soil, for example. So yeah, it's all gone, and you get very little energy out of it. So
thank you. Also, we have a question. Maybe someone compared coal power stations against waste incinerator plants. I think it's concerning CO2 emissions.
Okay. The coal plants, you mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think, as I said, waste incineration, depending on how you calculate it, I mean, you should always look into the emissions coming out from the stack, because this is which in the end counts in terms of for the climate. And burning waste, if you take into consideration also the biogenic emissions, is not much better than if it's better at all. I don't think it's better at all if you take into consider biogenic emissions. The savings are so tiny, and it would be still very highly carbon intensive. So it's not really alternative as a fuel. And you again, you probably would like to focus on avoiding and locking in again the waste system management into burning in other plants. So because I'm quite aware, and I think there are other issues when it comes to co-incineration plants. In terms of toxic emissions, they are even worse. So because they have, for example, at least in the EU, they have kind of the emission standards are weaker, so they actually produce also more issues in terms of the communities. So there's very active anti co-incineration movement in Europe. very much concerned about toxicity, and also what happened was that for this particular region, the toxicity issue, not so much about the climate, but also the toxicity issue, they also excluded burning waste in, for example, in cement plants from the scope of sustainable economic activities, because there's quite a lot of concern about it. So yeah, I would say that I think it has to be very clear that burning waste is very, very carbon intensive. So it's much worse than, for example, burning gas. It's double of the emissions of burning gas. It's probably the same as burning of coal. So switching from one to another, depending on what you burn, you might save something, maybe very little, but in the end, you are still polluting a lot. So you really want to switch towards more renewables and something which is less polluting, especially now when we are few years away from, having a climate emergency.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yannick. Also, there's a question, just 2 short questions left. Should we take them?
Yes, if you can do it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, very shortly. I think you have the next meeting as well. So what happens to the waste coming out of these upgraded MBTs?
The MRPTs or MBTs?
Yeah.
MRPTs.
It's written MBTs.
So yeah, so maybe it's a mistake because we don't promote MBTs. So because as I said, MBT plants, they produce, what they do is they try to stabilize the waste, and then they take the kind of the part which has a high calorific value, and they then burn it somewhere, either on a waste incineration plants or in a co-incineration plants. And this is something that we don't support, because in the end, it's the same. The output of MRPT plants, as I said, it complements separate collection. So what it does, it recovers more materials which can be then recycled, and the little amount which is left is stabilized and landfilled, simply, because this is the best thing to do. But you have to always put it in a context, yeah. So it's not, as I said, it's very important to understand this is not a solution to install when you don't do no separate collection or recycling. First, you have to start with the separate collection and recycling, and then you put the base in the MRPT in order to get better in not separating but treating your wastes.
Mm-hmm. So
and I would like to maybe call just very quickly, because we actually are, I also mentioned in one of the slides, but next week we will be launching our brand new report, which describes a little more of the benefits and what it's really about, and how it, why we propose it as an alternative.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And we will share this report definitely on all our resources. It will be in English. So there's a big difference between MBT and MRBT. Is R for recovery in there? R letter?
Yes. So the R is for recovery, and so material recovery. So because MBT, you don't really recover much. So in fact, even the European Commission has said that they are quite disappointed about it, and they would like to phase out both. I mean, in terms of the both a big failure, waste incineration and MBT. So yeah, and that's why we are proposing also an alternative, which is the MRPT.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have just a comment here. Great. MBT plants is what we are looking forward to build in Ukraine. Flexibility is the key. But I think that I hope they meant MRBT station.
Yeah. So they are in a way, so what we think as a strategy could be to use a MBT plant to upgrade them, meaning that MBT plants, for example, they already stabilize organic part, and they try to recover some materials, but they are not very effective and efficient. So they actually end up recovering very few. Now we already have technologies that can recover more materials from residual waste. So and that's why we are recommending this MRPT. So invest more technologies that are more capable of recovering materials.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Yannick. Thanks for this talk and for your slides, and thank you for explaining everything. I hope we will work to send this to as many people and decision makers as possible. And thank you for applying all the questions. This was really important and useful for Ukraine, but also I think that it is useful for other countries, other developing countries.
Yep.
Same applicable to them. All the answers that you have given us, it's everywhere the same. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, and it was a pleasure to, and hopefully it's going to be useful for you, for all of
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening and for your questions.